Welcome to all of our ISM members and guests joining us for today's program hosted by ISM New Jersey. Our speaker for today is Graham Crawshaw, who will be speaking on Scope 3 emissions. We will be running a few polls today, so please, everybody participate in it so we can get a good number from the group for today. Also, please be sure to place any comments or questions you might have for Graham. This is a different presentation that we've had before, so we really want to hear from you on your feedback. Now on to our speaker. I'm pleased to welcome back our friend Graham Crawshaw, who is the Procurement Content Director for CASME, and he's calling in from the UK. Graham has the overall responsibility for quality at CASME's Global Roundtable and Virtual Events program. And prior to joining CASME, Graham spent 20 years working in procurement for the music industry with an operational and marketing environment. At EMI, Graham regularly supported major artists, including the Beatles, Queen, and Pink Floyd, in developing sourcing their unique packaging requirements, and subsequently worked on the company's first music streaming contract. Graham is also a fellow of SIPS and is a frequent speaker for ProcureCon. I believe he's going to be speaking for ProcureCon coming up. On to you, Graham.
Thank you. And as always, thank you for that introduction and welcome. It's great to be here. I love doing these sessions. So delighted to be here. So yeah, thank you, Kathy, for the invite. So you know who I am. Scope 3 emissions. I must admit, it doesn't sound too exciting. So I've got a big job to achieve this session to make it nice and interesting and engaging for you. Very briefly, going to set the scene, remind you that all that I'm saying, I'm not making it up. It's coming from the CASME community. So I'm just going to say what that is, then talk about, and is Scope 3 linked with ESG? And I know it's quite a controversial topic at the moment with all the changes we've experienced, but let's go. It's an important one. Plenty of time for Q&A as well as the polls. So yeah, test me out on some of the questions there. CASME, we are a global procurement community and we're made up of members from across the world. We put on our own events, over 200 virtual events in the year across different regions. From that, we're able to produce different reports, different summaries, and also we do benchmarking. And we do that for indirect categories. We make sure that it's not an antitrust or anti-competitive situation by having conversations about indirect topics and also about procedures, processes that go right across the organization. So I'm going to be talking about data that has come from these companies as they've responded to the different benchmarking and different events. So you will see companies here from lots of different industries, different sectors, and that makes it a really interesting mix to get that feeling and understanding as to what these companies are all doing. But my final scene setting slide, and I promised it would be quick, is my favorite. So having heard that I've been in procurement throughout my career, it is so important to have information and market intelligence that is free from sponsors, suppliers, or consultants. And that's our USP at CASME. We don't have any engagement with any of those, which means every data point on the charts that I'm going to show you, every statement has come from literally thousands of category managers. That gives it a lot of credibility. And it's always then my pleasure to be able to summarize that and present it, hopefully, in a style and format that you're going to find of interest. Now, I'm going to start by sharing with you results of a survey we did just 2 or 3 months ago. And this is the hot topics in procurement in 2025. And what you'll notice is it's quite a concise list, but I challenge anyone that in any organization that this is the list that's going to be what you're working on. It's highly unusual for me to actually find something that isn't on this list that companies are seeing as a priority. Now, ESG is midway on this list, and this is in descending priority. And you'll also see a downward arrow. From previous years, it's come down. So we do our same survey regularly so that we are tracking the pulse of what's going on in procurement. So that downward arrow means that procurement is saying it is less important. And I must say, I think that positioning was done probably just before all the major changes came in the North America around ESG, around DE and I. And really, this reflects on a bit of a building frustration around ESG. So that's the positioning. But nevertheless, it's still very important. But I show you that relative to all those. I've got some other sessions planned with Kathy. I can't remember the titles, but I'm sure I'll be coming back to that chart when having other talks and presentations on different topics that are still on the list. Before getting into the specifics of Scope 3, just raise it up a little bit and let's just talk about an update on sustainability in the supply chain. And I had the pleasure of also presenting at the World Sustainability Day as put together by the organization, the charitable organization called the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. I've been part of that for a number of years now. And they did a 24 hours around the spring equinox where 24 people were asked to present. I put in what we could talk about, and a lot of the information I'm sharing with you today formed part of that presentation. And I got the midnight slot. So I thought, is that a good thing or bad thing? But actually, it was quite good, perfect, because midnight in the UK meant that it was early evening in New Jersey, late afternoon in the West Coast, but it was also breakfast time in Singapore and almost lunchtime in Australia. So it was really popular time. It was, well, actually, to be perfectly honest, I went to bed for a couple of hours to have a sleep before the midnight start because I had to have full of energy at midnight, and that was quite challenging. So the messaging is very similar to what I presented then. So sustainability in the supply chain is no longer an option. You can't avoid it. It's purely a question of when are you going to sort of focus on it. And what we are seeing is that the reason it's not an option is you need it to help you deliver cost savings, help you be compliant, and actually provide an element of competitive advantage. A very sobering point has been discussed recently. We talk about the opportunity to become net zero. And for many organizations that have made these claims, they've said, oh yeah, we're going to target to be net zero. And then they talk about a year. And sometimes it's 2030, 2040, 2050, almost kick so far into the future that it's hard to comprehend. I mean, goodness knows what I'll be doing in 2050, assuming I'm still alive at that date. Hopefully I will be, but I'll be pretty ancient. What it means, though, is if you look at the number, not of the number of years to go before that target or that public commitment has been made, is reached, but we do contracts for 3, 5, maybe 7 years. So if you look at it in terms of contract life cycles, we're talking about maybe 3 or 4. So when you start to consider that, we've got to get our act together. We've got to start doing something, because if you want to influence during an RFP, during a tender, there's not a lot of time before you need to actively sort of get involved and get working on that. I'm going to set that scene as let's do our first poll. So let me just launch this first poll. And it really, before I talk too much about scope 3, just want to get a feeling for where you are. So what stage is your procurement function at addressing scope 3 emissions? And it's just one choice, that's a single choice. So the options are, we're just starting to learn about scope 3 and its implications. We're identifying emission sources and planning our approach. We're collecting scope 3 data from suppliers. We're actively analysing and reporting scope 3 emissions, or we've integrated scope 3 into category strategies and supply contracts. So there's an element of scaling up and getting that built within the procurement process. Let me just give it a few more seconds. Great if everyone could respond. And just, it's your gut feel. It's not designed to be accurate. It's supposed to be just giving us a bit of a feel for the viewpoint of where we're at. And what I really like about these polls is when we do this update in 12, 18 months' time to see how the procurement community has progressed. And that's when you look back and you realize, actually, we've achieved a lot. And that normally is the case for anything that you're actually working on. In the interest of time, let me share the results there. Bit of a mix, and we actually are quite low. It'd be great if we'd had many more responses. I don't think that matters. It just shows you at this stage that, yeah, companies are doing something and actively analysing or collecting data. So it's starting to happen. I think that's the important point that I would make at this stage. Let me rewind a second, and I hate to assume. Procurement, we're full of acronyms and jargon and buzzwords. And I always tell myself, Graham, don't get caught up with talking a string of acronyms or string of buzzwords that may not be understood by everyone. I'm also aware, I mean, Kathy does an amazing job putting these programs onto YouTube, and many people watch them. So if you're watching on YouTube at some point, maybe later in 2025 or even 26, to have this as a bit of an education, I hope is also of value. So the definitions of the 1, 2, and 3, it can be confusing if you've not been engaged or involved with this at all. We'll share the slides, so I'm not going to read all the details on here. But to clarify, scope 1 is very much about the direct emissions that come from your organization. Scope 2 is where you've got indirect emissions, but still the energy or what is used within your production environment. But you know, the vast focus, and certainly where procurement gets involved, is on scope 3. And that, to be clear, is all the other indirect emissions, and typically is a massive part of an organization's total carbon footprint. So it covers logistics, it covers travel, packaging, and also services. So there's an awful lot that goes into that. And the complexity comes around in terms of the calculation. So we're only going to focus on scope 3. And that falls within the environmental part. Now, ESG is 3 letters that is used so often. We do focus a lot on the E. We focus less on the S, and a bit more, because we've probably done it, on the G for governance. But under environmental, that's where you've got the focus on scope 3 emissions. And I'm going to say that the majority of companies have got the rest of the work under the E, environmental, pretty much under control. You've probably got surveys. You've probably made those quick wins in terms of environmental impact that so many companies do, whether it's LEDs, whether it's reducing single-use plastic. There are all those obvious ones that we've now been working on for some time. The chances are you're using a system. The most popular one is EcoVadis, not a sales pitch for it. That's a statement of fact. It's data, its ability to collect that information and help you manage it. Equally, I know a number of companies that are using Excel spreadsheets, so you don't need the system. But the chances are you've got those surveys within the system, you've done some of the basics, and therefore this scope 3 for many is the new kid on the block. This is what everyone is talking about, and we need to start to see what we can do. Sharing with you some of the data that we've collected, and in part for this World Sustainability Day event, all of this collected from CASME members. And when we said we wanted to break down, because of that environmental side being so potentially fluffy, so vague, what actually is the most important area for sustainability? And it's great that when you get the data to confirm things, you do see that whole impact around carbon, around energy is by far the most important. 88% of our members stating that. At some point, feel free to look at some of the other data points on that side. I'm not going to go through it all. It'd be far too boring for you. But it's just important that there is so many aspects that really go up into making that whole environmental statement. And as I said, I hate the acronyms, so I've spelt that out. AML, it took me ages to realize that that was anti-money laundering. It wasn't an acronym that sort of came to mind. So I thought I better explain it in full. Why procurement? Why are we being tasked with doing all this work? Well, I think the main reason is because of our relationship with suppliers. We've got that. Now, there has been an issue, and I think one of the reasons why ESG has gone down in popularity is that we were asked to do too much and we overstepped the mark. And let's face it, with the pressure on cost, we've had conversations where many companies have said there's a challenge here. We've got the suppliers saying, on one hand, you're pressurizing us on cost. On the other hand, you still want us to do all this environmental work. Where do we stand? How do we achieve both? And so incorporating ESG into procurement is important, but it needs to be managed to make it manageable. The data shows that, 30% almost are saying that it should be incorporated in every procurement decision. 16% for high value, 20% where it is relevant. You can debate and argue about the detail indefinitely, but I think the message is procurement does have that responsibility. We can't just pass it on to another function within the business, and the reason is that supplier engagement. We then have the challenge of the scope. And again, you can end up being so caught up in the details, do so much that it's a balance. We've got a challenge. Generally, procurement teams are getting smaller, so you're not looking to take on a whole load of additional work. So what really should be covered? So when we tested that question, 90% did agree that reducing CO2 and looking at scope 3 emissions was the biggest and most important. Ironically, DE and I was number 2. I wonder if we repeated that now, as opposed to running this in, say, January, February, whether that would make a difference. Globally, I don't think it would. It's a story for another day, but I still maintain that diversity and using diverse suppliers is a major added value for procurement. What we're seeing, just as a complete aside, as a result of all that is going on in North America, we're seeing greater reference to supplier inclusion. That almost, I know it's playing with words, but that's almost permitting that sort of the good elements of what you do under diversity still to continue. Anyway, not going to get into that in any more detail. I want to focus and give you the value around scope 3 emissions. If you think that every other company has got this under control, then actually you're mistaken. We thought, and we got the sense from across our 200 plus members, that actually it's not as advanced as some of the suppliers selling the tracking system were making out. And so we wanted that data. And I think I'm not surprised. So we've got about 34% of our members saying we're learning about scope 3. It's early days. We want to learn more. We then had only 13% saying that we've learned, we're taking action, we're setting up teams to investigate. Then a further 20% saying, yeah, they've started the process of data collection. And then finally 10% actively analysing and reporting. And it confirmed the belief that, yeah, there's a long way to go. But as I've already said, you've got to get on with it. It's not an option. It's important. Make sure everyone is still with us. Let's do another poll. Let me just trigger the second poll. A very simple question, I hope. Which of the following is the biggest challenge in managing scope 3 emissions? Is it the lack of reliable data from suppliers? Is it the fact that you've got no clear ownership or responsibility? Is it the complexity of mapping emissions across categories? Is it the fact you've got limited supplier engagement or understanding, which I think is a really key add-on to that point? Or have you not got the digital tools for tracking scope 3? Interested to get those. So those of you that are doing something in this area, just give us some feedback on what your thoughts are on that. I know I've said the last one is about that lack of digital tools. If that's using Excel, then that's cool. That's working for actually doing this this process. Anyone else like to use the poll? We've got some limited results here. So thank you for sharing. Interest of time, I'm going to cut it and just share with you that I think, you know what, it's proving it's still early days. And getting those suppliers engaged and to understand scope 3, my goodness, you've got a big enough job internally, let alone actually spelling out to your supplier what is required. So let me move on. Again, wanted to share some data, really to get you thinking around this. Many companies are starting off the process. The data confirms it. It shows that 57% said, look, they're just setting up a project team. They want to learn more about it. They're setting out what to do. You've then got a further 17% that are taking that decision to bring in consultants and make some investments. All the rest really low score, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Another data point that we wanted to pick up on was looking at the categories and the priority. You know what it's like. You can't just go and do everything all at once. And I remember having conversations now about this and sort of saying, well, if we are going to experiment, if we are going to start to talk to suppliers, engage with them, ask them what data they can provide to us, which categories should we start with? And so I thought that was really good. We wanted to know that. So let me just explain this because it's a little bit more complex. I'm only looking at the most important or the first categories. So let's look at the dark blue and the lighter blue. So let's look at the bundled purchase goods and services. No surprise there, that's the biggest area. Looking at 28% saying it's the first category, 37% saying it's either second or third. So looking at that, you can see, and this chart really does put it in descending order. Once we've looked at purchase goods and services in general, we've got fuel, business travel, the waste, and then upstream transport and distribution. At the moment, capital is really small, but I think it's recognized it's got to be on the list. And so I think that's going to be one that's going to grow as time goes on and people get more focused on that. So I think it's important to recognize where's best to start and focus. But how do you do this? It's all very well saying get on with it, but what are you actually doing? And so again, we asked for some data. We asked what approach is being taken, and I'm not surprised when reporting to you that the longest line, 32%, responded by saying, yeah, informal discussions about emissions reduction with a few of your key suppliers. Again, there's no point in trying to do them all at once. It's going to be overfacing. It's going to be frustrating. Based on that previous chart of which category areas are most influential, most important, pick those suppliers and start the conversation. So I think that was quite encouraging, because that's really using the data to show a way forward and give you an idea as to where your priorities ought to be. Again, you know what, when I'm talking through, you know what, I put all these slides together, and I think many of you know I don't have a script, but I've done so much involvement with this. But you know what, sometimes I get them out of order. It's I follow the logic, plan it all in my head, but when I actually come to present it, I'm thinking, you know what, I've told the story slightly differently. So forgive me for that. But this almost validates that information. How is procurement assessing the emissions? And again, you've got that same approach. That the longest bar chart at 36% is this informal conversation with smaller suppliers. So whether you are looking to start, whether you're looking to do the calculation, the best approach to begin with is work out what's most important to you and talk with suppliers. I hope we haven't got any consultants on the call, but I would almost argue do that first before considering engaging consultants. Get a knowledge level internally that you can do from those key suppliers. Right, hopefully I've got this in the right sequence, the third poll for today. And let's just take a look at this one. So what is your organization's current method for assessing supplier scope 3 emissions? So you've got some initial data from your supplier. What are you actually going to do with it? How are you able to assess it? Are you going to do basic spend-based or industry average estimates? Is that what we're going to use? Do you want your suppliers to self-declare or respond via questionnaires? Are you able to do a detailed life cycle or product life level assessment? Are you going to rely on the consultants, or are you not doing anything as yet? And I quite like that poll, because really think it again gauges the different options that people have got and the state or the status of where they're at on that. So again, limited number, and of course those that are joining by watching the YouTube version of this video, you've not got an opportunity to join the poll, but never mind. Let's share the results. And no surprise that the longest one is the external consultants. Now, if you've got the tool, then I guess it makes sense. But please don't think you have to be so reliant just on third-party platforms or consultants to actually make a start or a difference in this area. pick those suppliers that can help you and learn in that way if you don't want to get the consultants from the outset. So let me start to summarize. So we've had conversations about this, and what I'm now trying to sort of lump it all together is really understanding how scope 3 can actually sort of fit in. So yeah, it does vary. It depends where you are in the world. Now, I would say Europe is most advanced purely because of the legislation coming out from Germany that requires companies to act and to report. So no surprise that the rest of us in Europe, including the UK, because we are still in the geographic Europe, has followed on, and conversations are much more prevalent with suppliers. Now, I spend a lot of time in the APAC region. And as Kathy said, I'm off to Australia, in fact, tomorrow to be part of ProcureCon Australia. And there it's just not as advanced. The challenge you've got is it's all very well you having conversations with your main suppliers, but if they, where they are situated, are not knowledgeable or not interested or not able to help you, then it's going to be quite frustrating. And there is a limit as to how much education you can offer to those suppliers. And so that is the dilemma, and certainly in some of the other less advanced countries, you're going to be struggling there. There's no question of that. So it does vary. You've got cultural differences, you've got maturity differences that comes through. For some companies, of course, Scope 3 is not the priority. It's still a focus on Scope 1 and Scope 2, because that you've got greater control of. So I think that's also a point. Getting data from the smaller suppliers is a nightmare. So start with the bigger ones, because that's going to have the bigger ones in terms of the impact to your organization that is. So education, that is something we're really good at. And I think the way that we can improve our stakeholder engagement, the way we can work with suppliers, also follows on this topic as well. So that assessment, it's got to follow, and you do need a calculation. And I would say at that point, the chances are you're going to be using the calculation that is provided to you by the consulting organization that you work with, or EcoVadis, or somewhere where that calculation can be explained not only to you but to your suppliers as well. Continuing the summary from all the conversations that we've had, I think it is important to get the subject under discussion. And the more we talk about it, the more we can understand, then that is going to be helpful, and ultimately will get incorporated not only into your category strategy plan, but also into your sort of organizational decision making as well. I shared with you, I believe we have got a role. We are rightly positioned to work with the suppliers that we deal with to get that information and data. So start that process, build up those conversations, share information, and that really helps you sort of get that information in place and then have something to report on. Data collection is clearly also an important process to be gone through, and I think focusing where your sense is that the emissions are higher is a logical step to take. It doesn't necessarily follow that just because you spend a lot of money on a category that the emissions are going to be highest. So even just take business travel, there may be all sorts of impact there. And what we're seeing, just to give you an example, is there are more and more of the travel booking tools that offer information, suggest which hotel option may have a lower carbon emission impact. Not easy to get it from vast majority of hotels, but it's starting. That's a direction that some of the large TMCs, travel management companies, are working on and incorporating that data. It's slightly more advanced when it comes to flights, so that you can then sort of select ones that are going to have lesser carbon impacts. And I know many of the systems then relate that to a baseline. What's the cost of having that meeting via video conferencing rather than meeting in person? Most companies have got the targets, and so you are going to have to do something. And I think the sooner you start, as I've explained, what we've heard is that process that I've gone through, that really is what companies are doing. So the action points, again, from many conversations around this and benchmarking that we've carried out across our CASME membership, these are the points. This is what they say you should be doing. So try and get some standardization in the measurement of all aspects of ESG, of course, scope 3. Educate, engage with suppliers, start that assessment process, incorporate it in an element of your procurement category strategy or overall business plan, and then you learn by collecting the data and seeing what stacks up, what doesn't. I know an observation from a number of companies is that when they estimated what the carbon scope 3 impact would be from a certain supplier, when they'd actually developed it further and actually got the data, they were actually quite surprised that the data showed it was a lot higher than what it was perceived to be. Collaborate, work with the business. You may lead, but don't do it on your own. And then in order to actually make stuff happen, set a target. Pretty obvious, I know, but even if it's a low ball target, even if it's not a quantitative target, set a clear plan of this is what you're going to achieve by that particular date. As I come to a bit of a conclusion here, what to watch? Keep an eye out going forwards. There are standards, regulatory standards, and there are companies that are good to follow. Many companies do report all this information. So if that is something you want to use as your learning, to help your learning, then do that. Suppliers, I think, are getting the message that the whole sustainability, scope 3, ESG agenda, it's not going to go away. And I think even though short term in North America, we've seen this move away from DE&I, it's going to come back in some shape or form because it is the right thing to do. So it's just a temporary modification or temporary hold on the priorities there. Scope 3 emissions reducing to net zero, whatever date that is no longer an option. We've got to get there, definitely. Also linked in with all of this is ethical sourcing, more on the governance side of ESG. And then I think finally bringing that all together, more and more companies are building it into their RFP process. For some, it's a go, no-go decision as to whether suppliers are monitoring and engaging with carbon emission reduction. Others, it's wanting more details to evaluate whether that supplier should be incorporated in the preferred supplier list. So let's face it, using the RFP process to collect information from your supplier is by far the easiest stage to get their attention and to get them to respond. So I think that's always a good one. As of we're May now, sorry, I'm a month apart. As of May 2025, what I've presented with you today is what we are seeing at CASME as to the state of scope 3 and carbon emissions across the world. Of course, as I said, it does vary. I've reported and shared with you data that we've collected from our members. I will recommend the Sustainable Procurement Pledge for anyone that really is wanting more information. It is a charity, it is an organization set up by procurement for procurement. So it was set up by the CPOs of Bayer and also Henkel, both German organizations, no less. But spp.earth is the URL, and some great information there. So I hope what I've shared, which has been a more realistic, practical, pragmatic solution for what most companies are doing at the moment, I hope that resonates with you. I hope that's been of interest, and always, as ever, delighted to answer any questions that you have. And if you're watching this on a recording, then by all means contact me. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so always connect in that way. But I'm going to bring Kathy back into the call now. Hi, Kathy. Good to see you.
Hello there.
I
Hello
hope that
there.
was of interest. I hope I positioned it right. I positioned it to align with what we're seeing companies doing. I'm not an academic. I wasn't going to I could get so technical so quickly, but I wanted almost to give peace of mind. If people think, oh, we're not quite as advanced or we're not doing as much as perhaps other companies are doing, then just engaging and doing something is the priority here. And I think regardless of how knowledgeable you are on the technical side of scope 3, it's a great subject just to be talking about learning and seeing what can be done, starting it sooner, knowing that you've got some pretty tough deadlines to meet, even if they are in 10, 15 or 20 years time.
Yeah, definitely. That's it. This is a important topic, and it's a topic that I know we have not actually explored in the past, but I'm glad you were able to bring it to the community.
Cool.
If
Oh, delighted to be the first to talk on this, because let's
you
face it,
are,
there are so many topics that we do talk a lot. I'll be delighted to come back in maybe not a year on this one, but 18 months to give an update. And I think what we will see is that we will be becoming more involved and get more mature. And as the systems for calculations and the impacts start to become more real, then it will make it easier. So I think at the moment, those that are engaged are still the early adopters, which is quite nice.
yeah, because I think in the past, all we've done is like touch on the topic, but we
Mm,
haven't really spoken about the topic.
right, good.
And I
Well,
think,
delighted to be the
just every
first
now and then, yeah,
to do that.
exactly.
By all means, I may have spoken for the last 45 minutes on the subject, but I wouldn't suggest that I'm an expert. I've just learned from as many people as I've been able to, and really pick up on what our company is doing and what does this look like. So it's a fascinating topic, and I say it's not going to go away, so might as well learn early.
Are there other organizations that people can learn from that I'm not sure if you mentioned all of them, but I'm just wondering if there are some other organizations that if they need want to invest some knowledge to learn a little bit more.
I'm not too certain. I mean, many of the consultancies will provide you with a lot of information, and obviously they want to partner with you because typically once you
Mhm.
select a consultancy, you've got that in place for the duration. Um, so I was keen to do a non-sales pitch version of what Scope 3 is all about. Of course, we're all procurement professionals, so by all means, listen to multiple consultants and get your view from them, which I know you would do before committing to that path. But there are a lot of companies that aren't even in that position to want to invest in consultants. So yeah, Sustainable Procurement Pledge definitely is a good source, or just the websites of the consultants to try and get a bit of learning on the calculations and just understand a bit more about it. I think there are loads of articles and books, but again, you've got to be just mindful if they're trying to sell you some stuff, which you may not want to pay for at the moment.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I think a lot of people were just trying to take in all the information today.
I hope so. Yeah, I say any questions, then come back to me. But I hope that has been of interest. I've done my best to try and because it can be a bit of a dull topic, quite a complex one. It's not as fun as some that we talk about, but I do think it's important. I think I'm next back with you to talk about logistics.
You
Is that the
are,
next
you
one?
are.
As it is, isn't it? Now that's another, and it's connected obviously because we've said about logistics having such a scope three impact for organisations. But looking forward to that one. So and I forget which other ones. I think we've got an AI one later in the year, but I do like it the way you get me to deliver a program and we spread it out throughout the year. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. A lot of people are thanking you in the chat here. So,
Yes, great. Thanks.
well, at this point, I'm going to close out the program. I'm going to say everybody have a good rest of the day and a good weekend coming up. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you all. Take care
Okay,
then.
bye
Thanks,
bye,
Kathy.
everybody.
Bye.